y'all have a lot harder time doing things like this than we did back then. Back in those days, at my age, I had no credit, I couldn't get a mortgage, I couldn't buy anything, but you could assume someone else's mortgage without having any credit or any history back then. Now they put in all the mortgages that you have to be approved to assume a mortgage. But back then I just found a lady that had a house she wanted to sell with a FHA loan on it, and I sold the mortgage and moved in the house. Well, by the time I was 27, I owned 7 duplexes, about 5 houses, and a 63-unit apartment complex, just starting with that one house. And you know, this just got started for me at a very young age, and I just really kind of got all the way from the idea of having anything to do with medicine. Well, then, the coroner in 1978 in Richland County, Cecil Wiles, had been coroner about 25 years. He had a heart attack and died. And I said, you know, he was dedicated, but he didn't. I knew that he didn't have the up-to-date knowledge of how to, you know, the forensic sciences had really advanced a lot. And I knew how he was operating, and I knew a lot of autopsies weren't being done that needed to be done. So I knew Governor Edwards. And I went to see Governor Edwards. A friend of mine who was a pathologist, I asked him, I said, would you consider being the coroner? And he said, well, he was the medical director for the Red Cross. He said, my job at the Red Cross is part-time. I think I could be coroner too. I said, okay, I'm going to go talk to Governor Edwards about you being coroner. So I did. And Governor Edwards said, that would be fantastic. Governor Edwards was an oral surgeon. And he said, I'd love to have a pathologist as coroner of Richland County. I said, well, okay, let's see what we do. So my friend talked to the boss, the head guy, and he said, you can't be coroner because if they need you, you have to go. And if we need you, you have to come to us. And he said, you can get a job working in the lab because you can walk away and leave lab work, but you can't be the coroner and the medical director of the Red Cross. So he said, Frank, why don't you be the coroner and I'll just help you, you know. And I said, me be the coroner? So I told Governor Edwards, I told him my friend can't do it. And he said, well, why don't you do it? You know, he said, Dr. Tucker Weston said you would do a good job. I said, I really don't know if I could do it or not. I said, I don't feel like I'm qualified to do it. I told him that. He said, well, Dr. Weston thinks that you could put together a team to get the job done. So I went down to Charleston and I talked to the forensic pathologist down there. Dr. Gordon Hennigan headed the department down there, Dr. Joel Sexton, Dr. Samuel Carride. I talked to them. Then I went to the University of South Carolina. I talked to Dr. Ted Rathman, who became a world-renowned forensic anthropologist. I mean, he wrote the book. He and a lady, another forensic anthropologist, wrote the book you find in every medical examiner's office in the country. He said, I'll help you. So I went out and SLED, and I asked the chief of SLED, will you do toxicology for me? He said, yes. So I found a dentist who had studied in the Army. While he was in the Army, they trained him to do identification of the dead because, you know, people get killed at war. A lot of times their bodies are burned. And so he was trained in using odontology or forensic dentistry. So I got all these people. I went to Rescue Memorial. I talked to Dr. Jim Rollins. I said, would you do all the autopsies on the bodies that aren't decomposing? He said, fine. I said, I'll send the decomposing ones out of town. But he couldn't take those into the hospital. So I put together a team of people. And to this day, I'll tell you, I am not an expert at anything. I'm an expert at only, if I'm an expert at anything, it's just getting the experts. I'm not an expert. But I know how to find anybody I need to find to do any job I need to have done. Last week I told a lady, this is off the subject just a little bit, she said, I want to use this gasoline-powered hedge clip to clip my hedges. I said, you hardly weigh over 100 pounds. It's big and heavy, and it's very dangerous, and I'm begging you don't use it. And I'll tell you what, just to be sure you don't use it, I'm going to hire a man and send him here this weekend to cut your hedges. And she said, okay. So I called the guy and said, I'm going over there on Sunday morning. So he got there about 10 o'clock. This is just a couple days ago. He got there at 10 o'clock. Her riding lawnmower, her push lawnmower, her hedge clipper, everything was sitting out there, and she was gone. On a road that 50,000 cars a day go by. She lives on a busy road. I mean, anybody could have stolen any of those things, but she was gone. He left. He should have called me. He didn't call me. But a couple hours young lady, she called me from Lexington County Emergency Room, and the little boy's okay. Her little boy is the smartest kid I've ever known. I have big children, by the way, they're all grown, and they've all got a good education, 4 sons and 4 daughters. But this little boy, I think, I don't ever see in front of him. His dad died when he was 4, and his mother was expecting a baby. And I try to look out for him. But this little boy wants to be a neurosurgeon. He is a genius. I mean, he is #1 in everything. But when she told me over the phone that hedge clipper had done something to him and he was in surgery, what went through my mind was so horrible that driving across town from out by the Veterans Hospital in Lexington County, I really thought I might have a heart attack before I got there, because this little boy, I don't know anybody at 9 years old that has more potential to do anything than this kid. And I just was imagining all kinds of things and praying the whole way, and I got there. Finally, a nurse, she said, well, it's only his left thumb. I thought, oh, God, that's a big relief, but how can you be a neurosurgeon without a thumb? So finally, after waiting for a long time, the surgeon came out and sat down. I mean, nobody else could really tell me, but he sat down there, and I can communicate with doctors. Turns out, he walked up by his mother while she was using it, and she didn't know he was there, and she turned, and the tip of his left thumb hit it, and it cut into his bone. It did chew up some of his bone in his thumb. But it didn't damage the joint, didn't damage any tendons, and he's going to be fine. But I tell you that story because you can look for things that are going to hurt people and avoid them before they happen. I took that same little boy to school the first day this year in the 3rd grade. I drove him to school. Do you know what Pineview Elementary is? I drove down Methodist Park Road. It goes down and it makes a right turn and goes over Lee Park. But when you get down Methodist Park Road, before it goes to Lee Park, there's a yield sign there. The people coming from Lee Park, they don't have a sign. They just come right around it. But when I got to the end there and I needed to go to the left behind Pineview, I couldn't see anything to the right. It had all grown up during the summer since I'd been to Pineview. The grass and the leaves on the trees, I could not see anything. So I started to ease out where I wasn't risking his life in my right rear seat, and a woman came flying around in the SUV and slamming on brakes, sliding up to me. I knew she was going to bless me out. So I had my window down. I said, "You had the right of way, ma'am," before she could say anything. I said, "Look over here." She looked. I said, "You see, you can't see anything. I couldn't see you were coming." She said, "That's really dangerous, isn't it?" 48 hours later, you could see all the way to Lee Park Road. You could do that. Everywhere you go, you should look for things like that. And if you won't call the right people, call me. Okay? Write my number down. 600-7119 is my cell phone. 600-7119. It's an 803 number. But I don't believe in seeing a danger and not correcting it. Many years ago, a woman was coming down Bluff Road. She hit water. She hydroplaned. She hit a tree and she was killed. I called the highway department. They came out. They said this culvert stopped up, and a pipe that went under Bluff Road and dumped into the swamp.